It is now 7 o'clock, so if I can welcome everyone to the meeting of the Corporate Overview Scrutiny Group at the Borough Council here. Can I remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and a recording will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. Under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings, Access to Information, England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. Could I also remind councillors, one, to either switch off or put their telephones on silent, please, and to use the microphones, which I forgot at the beginning, when switch them off when you're not speaking, otherwise we get feedback situations. If I can welcome Adam Oxley to our meeting. He is Finance Business Partner and will be presenting later in the evening. We've also got Charlotte Cavan-Attack, Catherine Evans and Sarah Whittaker. And Anna Paul. So if we can move on to the main agenda. Where have I put my, there we are, underneath there. First of all, can we have any apologies?
Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Bansal.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Right, we'll continue then to the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February. Rather than go through every page, can I assume everyone's read them? And has anybody anything they wish to comment on or amend? So I can accept those as read and sign them then. Thank you. Do you want to sign the other side on them as well? Right, now we move on to the main agenda items. The first one at 4 is the impact of COVID-19 on Brushcliff Borough Council. This was, if you recall, we had this in two separate parts. First part was internally, and this one focuses on the external operations of the council. It's at page 13 to 26. If I can ask if anyone has comments on the report, or if Catherine is going to present.
It's me, not Catherine.
Of course. Oh yes, indeed, I forgot. Yes, Catherine, I'm afraid it's a little hoarse. I am a little hoarse.
Lots of pressure though, Catherine.
Well, we're going to save Catherine's voice, and she's done a wonderful presentation with lots of notes, so she's going to make it work. I'm going to deliver her notes, and then we'll kind of team up with the questions afterwards and hope that we can make it through, because of course she's got the diversity report after this as well. So bear with us. Catherine's done all the hard work. I shall just read her notes this evening. So, as the chairman just said, this is the second half of the reports that we've done on the COVID-19 pandemic and how it affected the council and our community. The report that we had in February was very much about how things affected the council internally, all of our staff, our different departments, the teams, the work that we do and such like. It was very well received, and Mr. Banks came along and answered all of your questions. Now, for some reason, and I don't know why, You ended up with this evening's report and he wasn't coming along, but there we go. But this one today is very much about an external focus. So this is looking at our community, how it stood up, the work that you did as councillors to help the community and to show that community leadership, which was so important, but also how the county council was involved, how we got food packages out to people who needed them and such like. So we've got lots of information here, and it is a lot of information. The report is very comprehensive, and I know that you will have taken the time to read that. And Catherine and I will try and field any questions that you might have afterwards. But just first of all, we've got some slides, so I've got quite a lot to go through in terms of where we are, but there aren't very many slides. So just starting off with the community side of things, and in particular the community support hub, which was hosted by the county council as part of the local resilience forum. So this allowed residents across the county to request support for all sorts of things, from somebody picking up somebody's medicine, support, emergency food parcels, dog walking, telephone befriending, and physical well-being checks. So all of the things that your normal community would have down, that people would pick up with family and such like, the county council were offering that. And whilst they provided the support hub for that, and it was a web-based program and they offered that service over the telephone, it was down to the district councils to follow up on those and fulfill those requests. So there was, the other side of that was also that residents around the borough could volunteer themselves for being on the other side of that, so to do the dog walking or the medicine collection or deliver emergency food and such like. So our officers as well took referrals from that system and followed up. So we directly actioned 133 support requests, and the majority of those were delivering food parcels. So these were people, possibly elderly people without a support network locally, who suddenly find themselves at home shielding, or unfortunately with COVID and needing to stay home. And we delivered 96 food parcels, and they were mainly done by our environmental health team. And they had a great deal of fun putting extra items in. So there was quite a lot of work going on there. Staff were redeployed from across the council to make things like befriending telephone calls and to keep in touch with people who would otherwise be socially isolated. Interestingly, referrals from the hub in Brushcliff were not as high as other districts in the LRF, because we had an incredible community uprising very, very early on in the pandemic, with a lot of volunteer mobilisation. One really good example of this was the Radcliffe to the Rescue group, which over the course of 2 or 3 days pretty much had every street in Radcliffe hooked into a system with local volunteers, people on your street who were there, and you could contact them and get some help and support. And that all important social isolation was not necessarily as much of a problem as we expected it to be in the very early days. To combat that social isolation, one of the things that the Brushcliff initiative had were resource packs developed to support those who were lonely during the crisis. We had physical activity packs, recipe packs, active mind packs, and then family packs, which were distributed to over 100 homes and families across the borough as part of this initiative. We also secured additional funding for activity packs for children and young people living in Keyworth in particular, which were identified through the free meals scheme as those requiring a bit of extra support. And so far, we have distributed 50 primary age packs and 50 teenage packs, all of which were built up between council officers and Keyworth United, the community football club. Community networks. So as well as networks of volunteers, many community groups responded to the pandemic as well. So the majority of these groups were themed around tackling loneliness and isolation, as well as food insecurity, which was one of the major issues during the early part of the pandemic for some people. Some examples that we can see up here on the slide are Rad Cooks, the community kitchen, who were able to provide meals and social interaction to vulnerable residents. We had Cotgrave Community Kitchen, which was already in existence, but managed to tailor their response so that they delivered food to vulnerable residents. Unfortunately, some groups such as Move and Mingle were unable to continue through the pandemic because of the restrictions in place, and face-to-face meetings and numbers attending sessions, they're returning slowly. So some people are still a little bit concerned about those kinds of activities, but hopefully, especially over the summer, we'll see those pick up. Just moving on now to the holiday activity programme. It was funded by the County Council and introduced post-lockdown to provide children who would receive free school meals through the pandemic with physical activity advice, nutritional education and a healthy school meal during the summer holidays. That was also extended then through to Christmas, and overall we provided 786 places for 298 children across the borough. The HAF programme, as it's known, will be funded for a further 3 years. In this area, there was additional provision across the borough, including Cotgrave, Bingham, West Bridgford, Edwalton, Radcliffe, Kinalton and Eastleigh. And 1,524 funded places have been allocated across the borough. In terms of community grants, so the council supported, as part of the broader government scheme, individuals who were self-isolating but on low incomes. These were generally people who couldn't work from home, whose income relied on them being able to get out and work. But of course, if they had been in contact with somebody with COVID and therefore were isolating, or if they had COVID themselves, they weren't able to work. So these were the £500 payments. Brushcliff received 1,158 applications and has made 531 payments, which amounts to £265,500. It's almost the majority of our funding. We currently have 3 applications on hand waiting for evidence. Now, my understanding is that we are in a far better position than other districts nationally in terms of getting those grants out and being able to do so quickly, and not having a big backlog at this particular point in time. And I don't remember, Sarah, but you might, the funding has to be spent by, is it sometime in June?
I think the cut-off was the 6th of April, but they've got something like 42 days to make a claim after that date, and then the funding will go back then be unspent.
So we're quite confident that we'll have all of our applications processed and paid before the deadline. The communities team under Derek Hayden have also supported community groups, voluntary organisations and charities across the borough for applying for social recovery funding and community food funding. Again, central government funding channeling through the county council. So that has had a total of £220,732 for social recovery projects and just over £100,000 for community food-based projects. Some examples of these are the Cotgrave Community Garden, Ruddington Pantry, Keevolution and Radcliffe Community Gardens. We've also had funding through Trentbury Community Trust, the Friary, Meet and Greet, Lech Leisure. So these are people who are receiving funding to deliver social inclusion activities within the borough. A big part of community support was actually your own community grant scheme and the role that you were able to play in getting those grants out to the communities when they were needed. So we streamlined the process for accessing those funds, which meant that we could get money out quickly. It was mainly used for PPE, food parcels, craft activities to beat social isolation, and the materials used for the creation of medical scrubs, face masks and laundry baskets. So that money that you spent, about £9,000 of the allowance for the 2020 to 2021 was actually spent on very specific COVID related activities. The effect on sports when the COVID pandemic started, basically all sports clubs, community venues, voluntary clubs and such like everything ceased, no training, no competition. And of course, over the course of the pandemic, the national government bodies of sport worked really hard to produce guidelines to allow people to return to play safely. Lots of funding was available to them, and what we found is that many of them were very much overwhelmed by the amount of red tape and risk assessments and such like that needed to be done. And a lot of our time as council officers was spent working with them directly, just to make sure that they could get those clubs back up and running again, people could return to the sports as soon as they could, especially when those sports were either for children or were outside football clubs and such like. So funding is still available for those sports clubs who've been impacted by the pandemic, and communication is still happening on that. So moving on, my wonderful assistant is, she's there on it. Business support. So we had set up at the very beginning of the pandemic a business support webpage, which has received over 41,000 views so far. In addition to this, we had regular posts on social media, both our Borough Council social media pages, but also the Brushcliff Business Partnership. The business partnership itself switched to virtual networking and hosted 24 sessions, attracting over 500 attendees between April 2020 and July 2021. Thankfully, they are now able to meet again in person, and our local businesses are returning to that valuable partnership. The council was allocated £212,000 of welcome back funding, in line with restrictions being lifted nationally. This was from the European Regional Development Fund to support the safe opening of town centres. Catherine's given me a whole list of things here, but I'll just give you a few examples. So we had £10,000 was given to each of our larger town and parish councils. We had business support webinars, providing businesses with support and advice. 24 businesses received one-to-one retail support from PR consultants and retail consultants. 30 market traders attended a webinar on the basics of social media and establishing a digital presence. We had the Shop Local, Shop Safe campaign. We appointed high street ambassadors to make sure that people were aware of the restrictions and given the support that they needed to return to our town centres. We had an enhanced summer events programme in West Bridgford last summer, including the cinema in the park and various other events to bring people back in. We had improvements to the appearances of town centres, including planters, lighting and seating areas. The appointment of a temporary town centre manager, which has supported the delivery of a number of events and markets, and the development of a new strategy for the West Bridgford Way to enhance footfall. Christmas 2020, a gift voucher scheme with people nominating their favourite local retailers. Our very large and well accepted, much granted free after 3 campaign in car parks between April 2021 and September 2021. And we also had a £25,000 digital grant, which was allocated to 16 businesses so far. 11 more are working through quotes. So this is helping our local businesses build upon what they've learned during COVID and enhance their digital footprint. In terms of council-owned property, so the occupation levels of council-owned commercial property have remained very high, currently standing at 97%. Vacancies are being proactively marketed and securing new tenants. So the tenants that we already had at the beginning of the pandemic, we offered rent holidays to those that needed them. So a total of £134,000 was provided to 24 of our tenants. £75,000 has been invoiced and collected. So 19 tenants have already cleared their debts completely. 4 remain with payment plans in place. The outstanding rent holiday at the moment stands at just under £60,000. So we're gradually claiming that back in as people get back up on their feet. And I know that our tenants have been very grateful for that support, which must have been a very difficult time for them. The final retail unit at Cotgrave, which of course was completed during the pandemic, just to let you know, we have agreed heads of terms for that, which means that we are likely to complete that later this month, early into June. So that will then be occupied. And we are getting a very strong interest in the pre-letting of the business suites in Bingham, which are currently being built. So they're not even out of the ground yet, and we have people who want to move in and have them. Business grants. So we have, this is the additional restriction grant. All of these things came with wonderful acronyms. So we've had a lot of these. So since the scheme started in October 2020, a total of £4.7 million has been paid out to local businesses. 179 businesses have benefited from 595,000 of mandatory grants. The government announced additional rate relief for businesses affected by COVID. That was the CARF scheme, C-A-R-F. That was 1.787 million, and 1.709 has been allocated to eligible businesses. You'll remember that, of course, we've been able to process those grants very, very quickly in comparison with other authorities. It's made an outstanding difference to businesses in our area. Just a bit about COVID compliance. So as businesses reopened and restrictions were lifted, the environmental health team were incredibly busy, ensuring that businesses were complying with the government guidelines at that particular time. Of course, if you remember, everything kept changing, so it was difficult to keep up. So in total, the council served 23 fixed penalty notices for businesses found to be in breach of COVID regulations, and on one occasion had reason to seek the closure of a business in West Bridgford, where they were guilty of repeated breaches. In total, more than 800 additional COVID-related advisory and enforcement visits were undertaken by this team. Now, that in itself is worth pondering on, because these are visits that would not have been necessary if the pandemic hadn't happened. So 800 is a huge number. Littering in car parks and antisocial behaviour, drinking outside when the restrictions were lifted, but you weren't allowed to go in the pub, you had to take a drink out. We had some issues in West Bridgford Park, amongst other things, but we employed external contractors to help us with that. We also had in place an outbreak cell, which Jeff Carpenter, our environmental health manager, was very much in the head of. But what that did was allowed us to work across the county where there were outbreaks, rather than the pressure all coming on one authority and one environmental health team. Catherine's written something complicated about payment licenses. Oh, this was to allow businesses to extend their eating space outside, particularly into West Bridgford. And the licensing team, of course, were there to make sure that that was able to happen, which meant that we could all enjoy last summer a little bit more than we had been able to. Moving on to contract management. So the group will be aware that, of course, our leisure contract is outsourced to Lex Leisure. Because of the national restrictions, leisure centres were closed completely from March 2020 until July. And then they were closed again in November through till March of 2021. Throughout these periods and even now, officers from the Contracts Hub are supporting the safe opening of those leisure centres and the return back to various different activities. So that was a lot of work for them, and making sure that the regulations were working, that the advice from the sports bodies was taken into account, and also so that regular cleaning was taken place and that customers were comfortable and confident coming back. There was a National Leisure Recovery Fund. I'm sure that one had an acronym as well. But that supported the leisure centres, and £100 million worth of funding was managed on behalf of the DCMS by Sport England. So we applied to that fund in January 2021, and the council secured £224,000, which has gone some way towards helping the recovery of our leisure centre or leisure centres across the borough. In terms of how things are now, pretty good, considering it's about 30%, which is reflected across the country. Swimming is back up, just ordinary swimming. Swimming lessons are higher than they were before the pandemic. There is more demand there from parents in particular trying to make up for lost time, children not learning to swim in a normal fashion, and such like. So we with classes, gym, swim and such like. Old indoor bowls hall over the course of the pandemic, and what we now have is a very large exercise hall which can hold classes of up to 50 people and more, which is being used regularly. Yeah. It is a bit, isn't it? It can hold more if you're not swinging your arms around quite so much. I'm thinking of things like exhibitions and elections and things like that. There's space for more than 50 people as long as you're not throwing yourself around. Our community facilities also played a big part in how we dealt with the pandemic. So we had testing sites and then vaccination centres as well. So Gamston Community Hall operated as a vaccination site from December 2020. It was handed back to the council in October 2021, and we did some refurbishment. It's since opened, and the feedback from users there has been very good. Whilst it was a vaccination centre, they delivered 180,000 vaccinations to our community. Tremendous number. Testing sites, we were all, I think, remember the nice big white tents that we had in our car park here, and of mobile sites we've had in Eastleigh, Cotgrave and Bingham, and still we have those vaccination centres, the mobile ones, still working around the borough. In terms of communication, because all of this hard work is not worth much if people don't know what's going on. So the communications and media team, of course, as you saw in the last report, have been very, very busy through the pandemic. But we had a number of communication campaigns that were very successful, including the We Are Open campaign, Eat Out to Help Out, Shop Local, Shop Safe, and then, of course, specific information tailored towards businesses who were applying to grants. We've also supported promotional events and encouragement for people to get back into town centres and for their shopping and such like. We have promoted local businesses a lot more during the pandemic than we would have done normally to help them stay afloat and to encourage people to use those. We have also run a campaign that targeted 4,000 residents of our borough from ethnic minority backgrounds, because the NHS data was showing us that those from those backgrounds and lower income groups were not participating in the vaccination programme as much as would have been liked. So we have been pushing those as well. And then just finally, Catherine's last slide, just to highlight what's in the report, which are the critical success factors as we see them. Brushcliff had an amazing uprising. Local people very engaged in their communities, willing to help out to keep their older populations, their more vulnerable people safe. That meant that there was less pressure on the borough council to provide that service, certainly a lot less than there was in other areas where communities were more dispersed. So we had existing strong links between the council, our various community groups, sports clubs and such like, and then we were able to build on those. It allowed us to move very quickly, to be fleet of foot, and also to call on their help. The efficient administration of business grants, getting a system in place to not just allow people to apply for those grants, but to verify the information that we needed to and get those payments made, I'm sure was a lifeline to many of our businesses. Support provided in terms of finance, but also the physical support from officers in terms of help and advice for our leisure providers allowed us to smoothly open our leisure centres and of course the golf course and our community facilities when we were able to do that. And then additional support for businesses through various different grant schemes, that very strong business partnership and Catherine's team and the help that they were able to give to our businesses, the support that they've had, we believe is one of the critical success factors for how we dealt with them. If you can, and deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Thank you very much, Catherine. That was really interesting, and I hope everyone agrees. That was a very positive report, and from my own personal perspective, I think Brushcliff handled the situation very well. But the one thing I want to say, and I hope we will take away from this, that this was really good, and that we ought to, in fact, draw up an action plan should the worst happen and we find ourselves in a pandemic situation again. And also, I want to say that we need to draw that up and keep it safe and updated, but with the latest technology, because corporate memory fades, people leave, technology moves on, and you find that it's on microfiche somewhere and someone's got to go, or it's going mouldy in a cupboard. So somewhere, I think what we need to be saying is that every so many years it's looked at to make sure it's up to date and it's stored in the right place. I don't know whether anybody else agrees with me. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, yes, I agree with your comments. I don't really have a question as such, observations, and in fact, I think the last slide, which showed the success factors, that's sort of really almost a prompt for one of the things that's missing from the recommendations, and that is the congratulations to the staff and the workforce, because I think a lot of what has been reported in this report, I think every member of staff and workforce in some way or another were probably taken out of their comfort zone, first of all, and secondly, to use, I know, a cliche, but stepped up above and beyond, etc., etc. And I don't know what the technical officer phrase is, but all mucked in order to try and achieve something for the communities. So, I mean, just examples, you can go through the whole thing, but 4.29 and 4.45, which relate to the business support, I heard anecdotally from several businesses how much they valued the very quick, and you, Charlotte alluded to it, the very quick response that businesses received in support and trying to sort of keep themselves going, etc. Okay, there were always probably an odd hiccup here and there, but I think very largely everybody was very grateful for that. And I think that Rushcliff generally have, you know, they got a good reputation for responding well to the pandemic. Probably one of the lessons to be learned is don't have another pandemic. That's probably one of the things. But I think whether, well, first of all, I think we should say we welcome the information provided by officers etc. And whether it's part of that recommendation or we add a final one, congratulating and thanking all the staff and workforce for all the efforts that they made in support of the community of Rushcliff. You know, or whether we could keep it simple as that, or whether we try and invent some phrases that mean sort of mucking in and etc. But I think we all know the spirit of that. There's one thing where I would perhaps a point of information or change. You talked about the business units at Bingham are not even out of the ground yet. Actually, they're very nearing completion. And I would say that they're probably down to the final paintbrush and etc. They're certainly very close to completion anyway, along with the leisure centre is in the final home straight. I think also, I think it's scheduled to open in September, I think, if I'm correct. But certainly it's going well. So I think those business units, as you say, I think they will get taken up pretty quickly. But I think we need to make sure that we do put on record that we do congratulate all the work that's been carried out.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And on the back of that, can I say what came across was that Rushcliff has a strong liaison with its parish councils and its community groups, and we must never let that slip, because that obviously was vital in looking after our vulnerable residents and also in taking some of the strain off the offices at council. So I think we should record that and make sure that we never lose sight of our valuable contact with community groups. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, first of all, picking up on the comment suggestion you made about some sort of action plan in case of another pandemic, I think we need to, without wishing to be the prophet of doom, we need to also consider any other emergency that we will be facing or may be facing. So not just in terms of a possible pandemic, but anything else that might happen, who knows what. But this whole report, and I know we said this at the part one of this at the previous meeting, it's phenomenal, really. I mean, it just really shows just how much work not just this council has done, but work with the county and other authorities as well. And as colleagues have said, and you said, it's something we should be proud of. People out there will sort of take a lot of what we do for granted, and quite rightly they will say, well, just get on with it. But I somehow think it's a bit of a shame, really, because as time goes on, people are getting used to this new world of COVID, and it's also almost normal now. And I just wonder, on the communication side, I mean, councils get a lot of brickbats, but we did a really good job. We hit the ground running, as did a lot of our community groups as well. And I don't know whether it's practical to do some sort of reader-friendly, public-friendly version of this. So in future years, when we look back at what happened during the great pandemic of 2020 and onwards, that this is what happened, and this is tell a history, in other words. And I know councils are not here to blow trumpets, and I realise that, and I'm not saying it to do that, but it's such an important part of what has happened in the history of Brushcliff, the world, let's be honest, but our interest in Brushcliff. So I don't know whether there is any way the communications team, I know they're busy anyway doing their day-to-day jobs, but if there's any way of somehow really keeping this as a really good, interesting record, because I think it should be, and it's and all the work that's been done on the social side, particularly the isolation side, but also crucially on the economic side. I think we excel. The councils and this part and the partners excel themselves, and we do need to just fly the flag a bit.
Yes, I agree. We should be blowing our trumpet, or the council should be blowing its trumpet. Exactly. Absolutely. Councillor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, again, first of all, completely endorse the additional recommendation that Councillor Clark suggested. I think it's really important to do big, obviously credit to our team and to our staff, because I think the business grants themselves is a key example, because I've spoken to colleagues at other councils and they're so far behind where we were, and some still are very much far behind, haven't got their grants out yet. So cynics say they want to keep the bank account, but we're not that cynical. So I mean, the fact that we were really ahead of the game, and I remember I think getting emails from Sarah's team FLs going, "Oh, we found this business in your area. Are they actually real? We can't contact them and everything else." Really trying to get an extra mile to make sure businesses got all the grants they can, which is great. I think, and it would also be remiss of me not to mention Council Community Centre, obviously in an area which borders both myself and Sir Verdi's patch. The council support for the vaccination centre there was really welcome, and also the community running round. I mean, I remember going and speaking to the team, dropping off some treats, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're nearly out." So I thought, quick post on the social media group, and they got carloads dropped off them into treats there, and people wanted to volunteer and say anything you need, we'll bring around whatever. And it was just really great to see how everyone working together. So I mean, the point about that Councillor Butler made about go out there and showcasing what we do, I think we should do. I think also the work the community as well, also being a team leader with West Bridgeford Community Helpers, which similar to the Radcon Trent one, was faced a couple of days through social media, basically contacted everyone in West Bridgeford and create that real big network, and WhatsApp messages pinging every 30 seconds or so. We had to buy an extra phone charger. It was going that much. It was great to see where everyone wanted to help out, volunteering to go and get shopping for people. So we should absolutely, I think, thank our residents as well at the same time as showing what we did. But it was real good after everyone coming together. Thank you.
Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And without repeating all of what our colleague members and councillors have already said, I think we've done a fantastic job, absolutely, and the report has demonstrated comprehensively the success of all of those areas that Charlotte has just been through. My point really is just from a slightly different perspective in terms of blowing our trumpet and recognising all this success. I think it would be really worthwhile to try and think of innovative ways to try and get our residents to blow the trumpets for us. So lessons learned quite often in this sort of an exercise can be sort of very, very productive if they're actually from the recipients, not just the not just from our perspective. So I think recognizing all of that fantastic work and success we've had, but if there is a way of getting our communities and our residents involved in blowing the trumpet for us and recognizing that success and carrying that message across, I think it would be very, very worthwhile for us.
Thank you. One thing I would like to just say is, and again, it's about communicating it to the residents and everyone in general. We had a fantastic hygiene regime, not just in the borough, but nationally. And I would like to see us continue to promote good hygiene. And because it's good for the health of all of us. Within Brushcliff, it means we have more staff hours, but in the community at large, it's good for business, it's good for economy, it's good for our health, it's good for the NHS. So if we could promote that in some way when we are extolling the virtues of the way we handled it, but also that we want to see this ongoing. Councillor Gray, you indicated.
Thank you. Again, just to echo, I really do think that a huge thanks should go out. I think the council performed magnificently during the pandemic. I think benchmarking against other councils, we've done extremely well, and I think perhaps part of that comes from some of the work we saw in part one of this report, where we saw how the council looked after its own staff in this time as well. So people were well prepared and also to spread that goodwill to the community. I think it really shows how the council worked in partnership with the community. I think perhaps one lesson to look at, I seem to remember when the support hubs came online, looking at the numbers there of 133 support requests. I think anyone that was involved in one of the WhatsApp groups or community groups, we'd see that in small areas very quickly. So I think that's an example of where the community and the council worked in synergy, and then perhaps the community support hub filled in later on and still picked up those people that were missed and struggling. So I think that could be something that we could look at to learn a lesson of the resource that went into putting together that community hub. If perhaps more was pushed towards the community early on, although the community did an amazing job and really filled that, I think there was a lot of work that went into the community hub, and then because all of the work had been done by, well, not all of it, a lot of the work had been done by the communities beforehand, that resource perhaps could have been spent elsewhere. And that's me trying to look at this as a whole, and anything we could perhaps do better. But I think we did absolutely magnificent. Well, I think we as a council and as communities did absolutely magnificently.
Oh, Councillor.
Just picking up on something, a comment you made, Chairman, about the health and hygiene. I think at the moment it's voluntary in terms of the score, the grade being displayed at the front of the premises. I believe that it is, if I stand corrected, but I think it's going to become compulsory for that grade to be displayed.
You're referring to food outlets?
Yes, yeah.
I think we're all in agreement that this was a very positive report. We have a recommendation before us. I'm not going to read it out, but I hope the councillors are all in agreement with A, B and C, that we should be adding the fact that this was exceedingly welcome information, and that we would like congratulations to staff and the workforce to be relayed, and that we would like to see a future emergency action plan drawn up. I don't know whether that will mean bringing that back to be scrutinised.
We already got an emergency planning group, haven't we? So you don't want to cut across that.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Councillor Clark. So emergency planning is a function that we share with the County Council, we share staff, and that's been a big part of our ability to move quickly. So we have the Local Resilience Forum, which runs across the county. Brushcliff itself has emergency plans in place, business continuity plans. Every team within the council has those. So depending on the nature of any future emergencies, whilst this information is going to be very, very well received, and it will of course go on file with those, I'm not sure that we need to develop additional action plans to what we've already got, because I think one thing the pandemic has shown us is actually our plans were pretty good and we didn't know what to expect.
Right. Councillor Butler, are you? That's all right. Yeah.
Yes, I'd overlook the fact that it's we're doing it anyway,
Yes,
so we don't want to cross over. But if nothing else, it's highlighted the importance of that.
At least we've underlined it. Sorry, switched it off and now I haven't put it back on again. The diversity annual report, which is at pages 27 to 52. And I think again, this is probably, is this Catherine? Which is Charlotte doing the ventriloquist act.
Yeah, sorry, it's Catherine standing, her body double. So thank you very much. So for those of you who have been on COD for a while, you will remember that we have an annual diversity report, which looks at diversity across the borough and how it compares with the diversity across of our workforce, and also other bits of documentation such as the gender pay gap analysis and such like. What Catherine has done this year is combined that report with the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Scheme, which was approved last year. And so what we've done here is hopefully given you information that you're used to seeing about diversity across the borough, but also a lot of feedback and updates on the actions that were in the diversity and inclusion scheme. So just first of all, to look at the annual report. So all of these facts and figures are in the document that you've already read. The data about the kind of the makeup of the borough, for want of a better expression, is still being taken from the last census data that we have, which is dated for 2011. We are expecting the 2021 census data to be released in October this year. It does take them a long time to process it, and if you actually go on the ONS website and have a look at the scope of information there, you'll start to understand why. But some of this information, therefore, is exactly the same as what you will have seen over the last couple of years, and the changes for Rushcliff itself are not particularly dramatic. So just a few facts and figures. In terms of our ethnic background, in terms of Rushcliff as a borough, 94% white British or white other, as opposed to 93% in the borough. So fairly comparable there with our residents. In terms of our ages, we all know, we've been around long enough to know that we've got an older proportion, or a bigger proportion of older residents, and fewer younger the residents than we see on a national picture. As far as the workforce at Brushcliff goes, the majority of our staff fall into the sort of 45 to 54, and I think we've reported in the last few years that we have what's classified as an ageing workforce. Although this year we have seen more young people join the workforce than we have for the last few years, which is very encouraging. In terms of our residents, 6.7% of them would classify themselves as having some kind of disability that affects them on a day-to-day basis. Rushcliff as an employer, we're at about the 5% mark. And actually this year we've been re-accredited as a disability confident employer, which we are very pleased to continue being. Whilst we don't particularly match that figure head on, we do encourage people from a diverse range of backgrounds to come, and we monitor disability on our job applications within our HR team when they come through. In terms of gender, which is always an interesting one, residents is almost a 50-50 split. Within our workforce, we do tend to be slightly more male dominated because of the manual workforce that we have down at the depot on bin collections, driving and such like. I would anticipate that figure perhaps swaying a little bit more in that direction next year when you look at these figures. Because of course we'll be bringing streetwise back into house, and again manual workforce, they tend to be more male dominated as well. In terms of the gender pay gap, I am exceedingly happy to report that since we first calculated that 2 or 3 years ago, we've dropped from 8.9% down to 1%. Now that's not because we've been tinkering with any money or paying women more or anything like that. Everybody gets paid the same. It's a balance in the numbers of senior positions that are awarded to male employees, and the women are coming up the ranks. So there's a better balance at the top, which is always what it was about. Moving on then to the scheme, which I mentioned at the beginning. So we have an equality, diversity and inclusion scheme, which works across the whole council, and a high level steering group, which works with Catherine to make sure that these activities are put in place across the council. So just there, I'm not going to read through them, but the aims of that scheme, and I've got on my next slide some information about the work that's been done in the last 12 months. So starting off, first of all, with the website, the council's website is what they call accessible for people with different abilities. And we actually have qualified for the last 2 years, and we've just been reaccredited again for the 3rd year running. And this is about making sure that our website is accessible to those people who perhaps use a screen reader, a piece of technology which will read out what's there. People who have problems with their eyesight and colour blindness, which might need to change the way the screen looks and the way the words and the images look on the screen. Being able to zoom in without losing the integrity of what's on the page. Navigating the site without using, or just using the keyboard, or using a device that interprets your voice, and things like that. So our website as it stands at the moment is accessible. What we're working on is the documents on the website. So think, for example, things like our policies and strategies, which tend to be PDF documents, are not as accessible as they could be. And that's a massive task to go through all of that content and work that through. This year, we are working on a project to completely revamp our website with a new content management system, which will allow us to take that work another step forward. As another example of activity that we've been taking in terms of the plan, so the photograph of the young people that you have up there on the screen, these are pupils from Toot Hill School in Bingham who came to Brushcliff Arena to participate in Democracy Day. And we had activities that were all about getting them to put together some community pledges. Several of them got to stand for a party. They had to give a speech. We had a mock election and they were elected, and they got a rosette at the end of the session. But it was very much about helping them to understand what you do as their local councillors and how they can play a part in that as they turn 18 and gain the right to vote. With the support of East Midlands, we have the option of various members of staff training in British Sign Language. Obviously, our customer services staff are being targeted for that learning coming forward. We can access translation services if we need them through the County Council as well. We are looking at the option of various of our summer events, for example, the cinema in the park having some sign language at those, so they are made accessible to a wider group of people as well. In terms of our customer services team specifically, we've seen quite a dramatic channel shift over the pandemic. So web and email inquiries have doubled over the course of 2021. And so a review of customer services centre, the contact points, how we actually provide services to customers will be undertaken over the course of the following year. So that we can make sure that we are meeting our customers' needs, not just in terms of equality and diversity, but in terms of how they like to do business with us and their own particular preferences. Quite a bit of work has been done to tackle inactivity. I think that's sitting around and not doing a great deal of much. So GPs in Brushcliff are being encouraged to receive the active practice accreditation, which is that logo up there at the top. So this is about encouraging their staff to take more activity, more steps, but also then passing that on to patients and such like to increase the number of people following a healthy lifestyle. The active practice certification recognises that people are participating in that, and they are appointing a wellbeing team, introducing standing or walking meetings, hosting exercise sessions, creating a standing waiting room for patients, displaying infographics promoting physical activity, signposting patients to community exercise groups, and having competitions for active members of staff. We have also been working with various different communities in terms of junk food in schools, and helping pupils to understand that, sorry, your Snickers bar at lunchtime is not exactly helping you get through the afternoon, unfortunately. You may have seen comms in recent months about the woodworking group that was set up for those at risk of social isolation and loneliness. going back to the previous report now, but the men in sheds has had quite a bit of popular media interest. Moving on then to work that Catherine and her team are doing over the course of this year. So the Council's Economic Growth team are planning a recruiting talent event alongside Building Better Opportunities programme, and it's going to take place in June, and it's designed to encourage employers, this is not just the council but our businesses across the borough, to be more inclusive in their recruitment practices and show them that there's support out there that's available to them. So the event will include some presentations and roundtable discussions about unlocking the hidden talent of people with disabilities, young people, and also parents and carers who perhaps require a more flexible approach to work. We have also set up a mentors scheme using council officers to mentor young people at the moment through the Young programme. So we're in the process of setting this up to start in September. And if it is successful during that first year, rolling that out to other businesses in the borough where we can identify mentors for young people across the borough. In terms of our own staff, we have what's called a Kickstart Placement in our HR team. And we have also, over the course of the last year, had 2 supported interns. So these are young people of sort of college finishing age who have identified disabilities who would otherwise find it difficult to get into work. And it's about providing them with the support and a coach to be able to do that and get some very, very good work experience in an area of their choice that they can then take forward in their employment. The council also has an employee liaison group, which is a representative from staff across various different teams, and they act as a consultative group on policies and strategies. And Catherine has been working with them to develop their awareness of this particular issue, and so that they can make sure that the council is performing in the way that it should in this area. Our recruitment practices is something that we've spent a lot of time working on over the last 12 months. If you apply for a job at the council now, you don't necessarily have to fill in a set recruitment form and application form. We do now accept a CV as well, which means that people are more able, it breaks down the barriers in people coming forward with their applications. We have started to advertise our jobs on websites that are attracting particular types of people. For example, there is a careers transition partnership, which particularly targets veterans, and it's one of the questions that we ask now on our application forms to make sure that we are encourage those valuable people back into work. The council also continues to encourage young men, women, people with young families or caring responsibilities at the other end of the scale by offering flexibility. And of course, we have our smarter ways of working policy, which encourages people to work part-time in the office, part-time from home, and to monitor those times, start and finish times, to make sure that we have that balance between all of the other demands that happen on people's lives. It's interesting to note that over the last year, we've had 281 applicants for jobs at the council. There is information on the ethnicity, sexuality, gender, religion, disability for all of those applicants in your documentation. We have requested that information from other councils to see how we compare, and hopefully by the time we get to this point next year, they'll have caught up with where we are, because at the moment they're not monitoring the same things, so we can't see how we compare against them. But hopefully that demonstrates that this is a very serious part of the work that we do, and we are trying very hard to make sure that we are being inclusive in our working practices. Just finally, looking ahead to the coming year, and one of the actions on the strategy is very much about setting up or breathing new life into what those of us who have been around for a long time will remember was the Brushcliff Community Cohesion Network. It's kind of gone off the radar in the last few years and kind of dissolved into nothing, but we have recently granted funding and the remit to both RCAN and the RCVS to bring this back online and get in touch with very important community groups around the borough, making sure that we can bring them together so that they can support each other, but also that we have a place where we can consult on our policies and strategies and make sure that we get this vital information to influence where we go going forward. As with the last one, I'm more than happy, as will Catherine, to answer any questions that you might have.
Once again, that seemed a very positive report. Thank you very much, Catherine, for that. I'm sorry you couldn't deliver it yourself, but it was very ably delivered for you. I think Councillor Wheeler's just indicated he wishes to ask a question.
Thank you, Sherry. A couple of points. So the first one is around the recruitment side. I didn't see anything on there about apprentices and graduates, so I know, and just be interested to really learn what we're doing, how many people we've taken on the apprenticeships, because when you look down at the stats, 20% of our staff are under 35, yet look at the applicants, 50% are under 35. So also saying that perhaps some of our positions aren't suitable quite at the moment for people perhaps younger, haven't got as much qualification experience. So that's the key thing on the apprenticeship and the graduate scheme. We can really bring those people in. And from what I see, I should say that it's heavily involved in this at the county, but you see people from a broader range of backgrounds applying as well, and from different ethnicities, and also the gender balance is a lot higher as well. Females obviously apply, especially in the graduate scheme. So we're interested to learn how many people we've taken on. Also, if we pay the apprenticeship levy, I think it may be big enough to pay that, but also how much of that are we spending? And again, because really that's what that's there for, to be starting to recruit these people, and effectively otherwise that money would be going straight back to government if we're not utilising it. So, but again, I don't want Catherine to use her voice. So if you don't know the information, I'm happy to get another time. I really don't want to.
I think unless you want to jump in because you know the information, I think that those are very specific things which I've made a note of. We do have a number of apprentices across the authority, and we do use the apprenticeship levy. But what I'll do is I'll make sure that we get some information out to you that's more accurate than just what I can pluck out of the air.
Thank you. And if you just get another point, Chairman, if you don't mind, or I'll actually let Councillor Clark go first. Okay, no, thank you. It was just around well, just two one. Well, it was quick ones. Around what you say about the theatre in the park, around using people to sign language to help people, which would be great to do. Obviously, just with how hard it might be for some people to see everyone doing the sign language. You can get headsets or the description ones. Again, Decoration just running cinema for 9 years, so I know you get these from there. So perhaps speak to UK Cinema Association to see about what perhaps we get those lent out, as well as it'd be great to do as well. I'm just saying to actually make sure maybe we can actually participate. The audio descriptive, which is like I say, describe what's happening on the screen, which again you can get through an audio headset as well. So perhaps so really suggest that. Just finally, Chairman, just around the canteen, you talk about healthy eating. I think that's something we should be really on with from ourselves. So again, I've not been to the Arena Snack Bar for a couple of months. I don't know if that's changed, but again, when you go across there, bit of cake, sugary stuff, etc., perhaps we should be really speaking to Lex Leisure about what they can do, and at the same time, all our other provision, like at the golf course, etc., just make sure we've got that balance options there. Because I know I'll be the same. If there was a healthy option, if I see the chocolate bar, as you can see with this magnificent physique, I'll go for the chocolate bar first. But really, it should be the fruits. If we perhaps more balance in that, would be really helpful. Thank you, Jim.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's a very good point. What I would like to say is it's really interesting this report came out and how it's come out, because as I transition from this role to my future one, I am already looking at communications, and in the way that I have someone to read at council before the meeting. I'm actually going tomorrow to the Deaf Association to talk with them, and they're already going to present at my first full council meeting, and so we're looking at signing the meeting. So it's all very fortuitous, it's all come at the same time, and very good. Councillor Clark, I believe you indicated you to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, my question is, have I misread, misinterpreted, or even looking at the wrong table, any or all of the above? I'm referring to right back to the very beginning. You talked about the demographics of Brushcliff and the age groups, and I would have agreed with what you said, that a high proportion are of the very much the older groups. But if you look on page 38, Appendix A2, as I say, please correct me if I'm misinterpreting it or got it wrong. But the ages 30 to 44 and 45 to 59 on this table, I appreciate it's 10 years old, the information, is a much higher proportion than any of the other age groups. But as I say, am I misinterpreting it? Because it just seems odd to me that those two age groups are so much higher than even any of the what I would have thought would be the older, much older age groups. Stunned silence. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean whether you want to whisper to Charlotte.
I can check the data, but I think that's correct. But yeah, you're right, it does stand out, but I'll check that.
Yes, thank you.
Has anybody else a comment to make? Was just one thing I wanted to say. Can we ensure all reports are totally inclusive in today's modern age regarding gender, etc.? If you look at Appendix B and D, I was slightly concerned that we just have male and female. Maybe we should be looking at other groups.
Catherine told me the answer to this one
Has
earlier
that-
on,
yes.
so I can cover
Already
this one.
flagged it up.
So interestingly, as far as HMRC are concerned, and in terms of payroll data, they only have two categories. You are either male or female, which means that from our payroll and accounting point of view, we recognise that people are male and female. Now, that's all the system does. There are no, and I've raised with Catherine today that I personally don't feel that that is appropriate moving forward. Our internal forms for things like job applications and such like do have other categories, but even then I think we could perhaps broaden that out somewhat moving forward. So Catherine's made a note of that, and it's something we will go away and have a look at.
In fact, moving forward, do we need to have either or another? We are all one. And if we've got true equality, we shouldn't really need to identify. But that's moving forward. Oh, Councillor Gray.
Just on Councillor Clark's point on the table, the age profile given in 4.3 states residents who are over 60 years old. So that's like the last 5 columns of the table added together. And then between the ages of 45 to 59. So that's a single line. So that's where the interpretation's not matching there in your head, I think. Because yeah, everything over 65 is added together as one.
But even then, it only comes to 25,000, which is not a lot more than ages 30 to 59. Anyway, there's no point in getting into semantics.
Right, if we've exhausted our questions, then we remove the recommendation. There are 2. Is there anything anyone feels we should be adding there? I think what we need to be saying, you will take on board what has been said. Are we all in agreement with those?
I think, Chairman, we are addressing the issues more than adequately. Therefore, I can't think of anything specifically that we need to be suggesting, because as far as I'm aware of what's being described, I was going to say we're ahead of the, maybe not ahead of the game, but we're certainly more than equal to the task of doing what we need to do.
Yes, so the recommendations A and B cover everything that we've been saying. So thank you very much, Catherine. Are we able to let you go now, or is there something else? Because I think you ought to go and get some honey and lemon and go to bed. Thank you for attending anyway. Right, we now move on then to finance and performance management at pages 53 to 94. And I think this is Sarah and Adam. Oh, Adam and Charlotte. Oh, that's it right.
Thank you, Chair. So the report shows the quarter 3 position to the end of November with COVID variances highlighted separately. The budgets were set prudently, anticipating adverse COVID variants, but the largest of which recovered more than anticipated, namely car park income, leisure, planning. Table 1 at paragraph 4.2 summarises the position at quarter 3, including lost income and costs due to COVID, showing a COVID net pressure of £118,000. This is offset by other in-year efficiencies, savings of 1.187 million, leaving a net revenue efficiency of 1069. Appendix B details the significant variances. So table 1 also shows additional non-ring-fenced grant funding of 167,000. Business rate surplus of 2.958, 2.4 of which to be transferred to reserves. That's to cover anticipated deficit in the next couple of years. This is a timing difference between grants and release. Paragraph 4.4 details further commitments from in-year efficiencies, which are shown in Appendix A. And then, yeah, Appendix A summarises the revenue position and overall £54,000 efficiency. Further down, paragraph 4.5 and Appendix E shows the special expense position, also affected by COVID, some covered by sales fees and charges funding, leaving a total special expense forecast deficit of 15.7 thousand. Paragraph 4.7, 4.8 summarise the forecast capital underspend of 5.1 million, mainly relating to Bingham Hub and Cockrave crematorium. Appendix C and D provide further detail on capital schemes. Paragraph 4.8 explains expected receipts and the unlikely need to borrow due to current projections. 4.9 to 4.11 updates on the group on COVID issues. And then in conclusion, the projected position is positive with a net £54,000 efficiency saving. The 104,000 in the paragraph 4.12 is a typo, so please ignore that. The tables are correct. Obviously, there are uncertainties over funding, increased cost of goods and services, along with government policy reviews. A healthy reserves position is vital to ensure we remain financially resilient. So we must not remain complacent. There's still lots of uncertainty due to business rates issues, comprehensive spending review, fairer funding, Brexit. Not to mention opportunities in the Freeport and Development Corporation. So the Council's financial position will need to be closely monitored. And then I'll hand back to Charlotte for some more talking for the second part of the report, the performance part.
Thank you, Adam. So the second part of your Q3 report, as always, is about performance. So appendix is F and G, and we'll give you some more information. But just to go over the highlights, the strategic tasks are considered first. You'll see that 2 are still showing a 0%. So this is the beginning of year 4 of our corporate strategy. The 2 that are showing 0% are both of them for exactly the same reason. So this is planning and waste and resources. This is 2 pieces of the legislation that we were expecting to come out in year 2 of the corporate strategy. And because of COVID and other delays, we are still waiting to find out exactly what we are going to be asked to do, what there might be funding available for, and what kind of timescales we are working on. So neither of those 2 pieces of work have started, but the majority of the other strategic tasks are progressing in line with revised timescales because of everything that's happened over the last few years. In terms of performance indicators, you've got 13 showing as a little red shield. 12 of those have already been reported to COG at some point this year. And what we've done this time round, you'll notice, is we've tried to make it really clear where those comments have been updated and where they haven't. So for a lot of performance indicators, especially those that are only measured on an annual basis, or even because they're the resident survey every 3 years, that nothing has happened. There has been no change and there won't be any change. So hopefully there are a few in there where they've been reported before, and we've actually updated the comments where performance has changed, but it's not changing quickly enough to take them back into the amber or the green. The one new exception is about choice-based lettings, which is the scheme that allows our residents who have homes through metropolitan housing. It's about the average time that they've been waiting to be rehoused. So maybe their circumstances have changed and they need a bigger or a smaller house or a different location and such like. This backlog has been caused by 2 different factors. One, unfortunately, was an internal change at Metropolitan, which has caused delays internally for them. But also that the COVID situation externally has led to some staticness in the system. Basically, nobody moved during the pandemic, certainly during the first 12 months. And so there has been a pause in that general turnover of properties, which is seeing some people waiting for quite some time before they get a property that meets their criteria. So the main thing to remember here is that this isn't homeless people being housed in whatever can be found for them. These aren't desperate situations. These are people already in the system who are looking to change their property for something else. So there has to be a certain amount of movement within that system to allow others to move forward. So you're in the scheme, as it were. I don't have any particular comments to make on the performance other than those. But I'm sure Adam and possibly Sarah and myself will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Charlotte. Does anybody have anything? Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On the underspend of the 5 million, am I correct? Is that mainly sort of cash flow or changing the timescale or the year in which it was being spent? So, because obviously, on the face of it, underspend of 5 million on a capital program is quite significant. But obviously, in COVID times, etc., I'm just assuming that there was it's changed the allocation year by year. I've got some other questions on the performance, but if you want to answer that.
Yes, it's mainly slippage on the crematorium and Bingham Hub into next year, the vast majority of it.
Yeah, so I mean, basically the money is going to be spent. It's just not as we originally had planned it.
That's right.
Yeah. On the, I'm just interested on the where are we? Customer call centre. I don't know whether I'll probably answer my own question, I don't know. The percentage of calls answered in 40 seconds during pandemic, etc., people would have been wanting to have quick answers, but possibly the answer is because perhaps their questions were a bit more, inquiries a bit more complicated than usual, and therefore the call centre was more occupied. Just interested to know.
It is partly that, yes. So when we are seeing people, so if you can imagine all of our customer services staff, they answer the phones, they answer emails, they deal with face-to-face inquiries, they deal with web inquiries. If they're dealing with somebody at a front desk somewhere, so in person, they're not answering the phone. So that can have a delay in terms of people getting through on the phones. The complexity of what people are asking when they phone up, because they're not able to come in person during the pandemic because that wasn't available, that meant that we were dealing with more complex things on the phone than they would normally have done in person, which lengthens the call, which means that people wait in the queue. As we've said in relation to this indicator in previous meetings, actually the 40-second target is a little bit unattainable in today's world, where you can sit and listen to Virgin Media telling you that you're very important for 40 minutes before you get answered, let alone anything else. That target we are extending to 60 seconds this year. So we've been starting to monitor that. 80% of our calls get answered within that 60-second target, which we feel is a much better measure of how we're performing in the current standards. I think the 40-second target's probably been around since about 2005, but the demand on the service has changed considerably since then.
Councillor Verdon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up another point on the underspend. I'm assuming that underspend potentially means there's an increased level of investment available to us. So the question is really around if that is the case and there is an increased investment income, has a loss of that and the reduction of that once that capital sort of underspend amount is available for future investment, has that been factored into the sort of longer term projections?
Okay, so you are right. Yes, as you can see from the variance analysis on that same table, you'll see that there is a over recovery of income on investments, and that is, like you say, as a result of having more to invest, and also slightly to do with the interest rates going up a little bit. But what we do moving forward is we assess how much we think we're going to have in our reserves. Obviously, that will differ depending upon slippage in the capital programme, additional COVID grants that we have to hold on to, like for the business rates grants that we're holding on to for sort of like a 2-year period, that will be invested. So, but we do make an assessment of that when we set the medium-term financial strategy in March.
Can I just say that we talk about Metropolitan having had difficulties, staffing difficulties, and that these should be resolved during January 2022. Have we had any further update, or have we chased for any further update? Maybe we can't answer that.
I don't know, but I can find out and feedback to you.
Right, okay. And whilst we're on the performance indicators, etc., planning has been sorely hit, and there have been horrendous delays in planning applications within my ward. I have them going back 14, 18 months. And they're now going for appeal for non-determination. How much will those appeal costs be to the borough?
Thank you for the heads up on this one, which allows me to be able to answer this. So at the moment, we've got 2 planning applications going through the planning inspectorate for non-determination. I can't tell you where they are. I don't know. I don't ask such questions. Both of those are being dealt with what we call under written representation, which is the kind of the lowest level in terms of how much cost and involvement there is, both from our officers and also from the planning inspectorate. And at the moment, that means that there is no cost associated with those. Obviously, once those determinations are made, that may change, but the process of going through that is very low cost.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, can I just clarify? Presumably there will be a nominal cost of officer time in answering the appeal, surely.
Yeah, my understanding is everything's done with emails and written documents, so there'll be a cost involved with bringing those together, but I don't believe that we pull that together as a cost that you could put onto the appeal at this stage.
Does anybody else anything they wish to ask? Very well. So that means that we're all fairly content with the reports, and I can't find the recommendations at the moment. Hopefully they're at the end. Yes, here we are. No, that's not the one. Here we go. There we go. Thank you. Are we content with those recommendations? Is there anything we would like to add or amend? So we're all in agreement. Councillor Butler's squinting at his. No. So we're all in agreement with that. Lovely. So that leads us on to feedback from Scrutiny Group Chairman. Before I go to the individual groups, as I am a chairman of a group, I would like to report back on two matters. One, we had, thank you very much, both of you. You don't really want to listen to the rest of this, do you?
Thank you.
We had some scrutiny training, interactive training, which I think was fairly well received. Certainly we had a good turnout. I do appreciate that the scenarios we presented were in fact pure fantasy, and therefore may not actually have been relevant to your individual groups. However, I think it gave people the opportunity of seeing how and why they should be asking questions. I think Charlotte will be reporting on, there's been some drop-in sessions on scrutiny matrices, which I think Charlotte will be reporting on. The other thing that I will report on is the fact that we, as I have been doing, I've been attending the East Midlands Council's networking group, which we've extracted some interesting points, haven't we, Charlotte? Not all of it is riveting, but we have extracted some interesting information. And the last one was about the attendance of witnesses, as they seem to call them, at scrutiny meetings. And I think we are of the opinion that, yes, we should invite those that put forward a matrix to attend a meeting. That will be at the discretion of the chairman to talk to the matrix. And that could be the corporate overview chairman, or it could be at the individual group meetings. But I think any attendee, witness or councillor is at the to be at the discretion of the chairman. And I think that's really all I have to report. So I'll move on to you as individual chairman. Councillor Wheeler for Communities.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just make a quick point on your comments about the scrutiny matrix, I think it would be most appropriate to come here rather than the committee. Once it's gone through here, it goes into report to the committee itself. So it should be about if we are make a decision here, if it goes forwards to a certain committee, then absolutely letting the councillor come down and or dial in, so to speak, to explain the reason more. I've got absolutely no problem with, but like I say, it should be this group, not the individual ones, in my humble view. So our community meeting was actually last Tuesday, so very fresh in the mind and a very long one. So we just had the one item on the agenda. Originally, we we're going to have the waste strategy, but in as what's happened the last 3 or 4 times, we're going to scrutinise that. It's had no progress from government yet in terms of the white paper, because they're slightly busy with other things apparently still. So we are awaiting that one. So that's going to keep sort of be on the back burner until we get the decision through. Then we'll look to bring that forward as soon as we can to the community group. So our work program may have to change in short notice based on that. So it was carbon management plan was our only item, but I say only item. It was still 2.5 hours, and probably it would have been a lot longer, but it got to the point we just had to curtail at that point due to we scrutinise it to the point where we'd covered it in sufficient detail. So as we're fully aware, the council's committed £1 million into the carbon management fund to make sure that all the council run services are carbon neutral by 2030. So it was getting an update on the progress of that. I think be a bit disruptive because I think we're on our 3rd officer now looking at in the last couple of years. Just nothing to do with the council or the role from the feedback from both people left. It was just to personal circumstances. So obviously that's not ideal. We sort of restart again, but Derek's been doing a good job in terms of keeping that going as line manager above that one. So where we currently are is that we are on track, which is obviously where we want to hear in terms of being there for 2030. The feedback was that part of the presentation said that we still need to do an action plan and look at the low-hanging fruit, where that should really be done a year or so ago. So I mean, just because of that disruption and the people leading it, that's why we're not quite at that plan. So feedback to sort of get on there with as quickly as possible. We should be identifying these quick win opportunities to make that progress. One sort of key bit so far to the strategy of it rolling out the EV charging points has been the grant fund that we've managed to get through the LAD scheme. So our office has done a really good job in terms of getting that funding compared to councils, and nowhere near the amount of funding we've got in terms of EV charging points. So we've got like Campston, the ones that have been rolled out to places like Redcliffe on Trent and Keworth in the car parks. The sort of question that I asked, though, I'm saying, was around where we are with West Bridgend in terms of central car parks. The issue we have at the moment is the electricity supply isn't at the standard it needs to be to supply to have EV charging points in the car parks. So currently going through a process trying to get funding and speaking to Western Power to get there. And I know there was a meeting, I think it might have been today, in terms of trying to progress that forward. So hopefully we'll get an update soon, and that's where we are there. Because what I made was, if we can't get that funding, because the reason we show the funding for the LAD is you've got the certain criteria, so you have to be in a certain distance to a trunk road. There's also some other criteria as well. So central obviously being central, part of the name, isn't close enough to the road to qualify for that funding. So that's why potentially out of the £1 million we've got, though it might look like it's a lot of money and we haven't spent a lot of it yet, there's some very high ticket items I think we're going to have to pay for in terms of putting that funding ourselves, and putting that infrastructure in place is going to cost a lot of money, 6-figure sum in terms of putting that in there. So we have to just prepare ourselves for that, and also things like our leisure centres. So if you think things like Keworth, which has seen better days, needs a bit of a refresh. When we look at to make that or carbon neutral friendly, that's going to take a lot of money in terms of retrofitting costs. Obviously, when you're building from scratch like we're being like we did here, and even here, to be fair, would still need some work to get to that standard, because where we were building just probably a year or two ahead of its time. So again, although we haven't spent a lot of money so far, a lot of it's been done through grant funding, which is great. Like I said, next couple of years, I think it's going to take a significant part of that fund. So we have to bear that in mind in future financial planning, which the financial officer, he disappeared for I said this, in terms of future funding to sort of top that up going forwards to make sure we keep going that aim, because especially with the change technology all the time, we don't know how that effect's going to have on our budget, and the need to get there sooner. So really interesting, important as we are to. One concern I did raise, which I'll speak to cover portfolio holder as well, is around the plan to potentially purchase land to plant more trees for carbon offsetting in the future. Obviously, it's not what large businesses do at the moment to get to their targets, which is, if it's kind of simple way, buy a load of land, big load of trees, and we get that target. Obviously, for ourselves, council, my concern is, obviously, we know the price of land in Brushcliff, and actually there's more clever options around that. So for example, we've got the nature reserves. So we're absolutely delighted we get funding to take large areas for trees, and obviously pockets of land we have as well. Again, would be large scale, but if we were very clever on planning, I think we could cover a lot of the target we want to do with the offsetting. And then we have to buy land obviously it's the worst thing to buy land for, but obviously it's just about making sure we utilise every option without spending that money first. Because again, part of that £1 million budget, we can just imagine how much of that will go in terms of having to buy large enough land area to plant trees. So that was one partial concern there. We also did raise some points that I think it's on the next slide around the scrutiny matrix that was raised by Councillor Walker. So happy to cover that separately if you want to, Chairman, just, when we get to that report. But as I say, it was really good feedback from all the members got involved. A lot of questions. As I say, we could have got a lot longer. I think the presentation was an hour in itself from officers, so it was very lengthy itself there, and obviously answer the questions going forward. So it's one that we have to make sure it's definitely on the agenda every year at least. I think probably 2 to 3 years time, we'll have to be there a couple of times a year just to make sure that we are really getting on board to make sure we're not going to get to 2029 and suddenly have to say, we're slight trouble here, we have to spend a lot more money. We need to make sure we are keeping us off the plan, not getting complacent, and obviously at the same time we can get ahead of 2030 as we want to do. We don't want to set an arbitrary target of, like some councils have done, to look clever by going a year early and spending millions and millions of pounds more that perhaps don't have to get there. We want to do it sensibly, but at the same time we've got to make sure we can't afford to push that back. We're giving a clear commitment to our residents, and we've got to make sure we achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. What I would say is, can you keep that in your radar? Because as you say, technology is moving on very fast, and whilst ever we might think we'll bring that back as a report in 12 months' time, it might become more urgent. So I would urge you to keep it within your radar.
Well, Chairman, I've just reread one of my notes. I couldn't read my own writing, which is always useful. So one thing that we've trialled with the waste collection vehicle is actually using oil. So old oil. I can't remember the correct term. So read something over oil. But basically chip fat. Yeah, I'll try to find the fancy name, but Councillor Gray's brought that down to earth, which you should do, to say basically chip out old oil to use to power vehicles. Which, talk about technology, that's actually a great example of, because looking. For example, with our vehicles, though you could go around Rushcliff electric vehicle, but if you're going to go to more rural areas, the ones you represent, you're probably get halfway down the street, then you're going to have to come out and give them a push down the hill. So we've got to be clever to know that actually sometimes we can't use, we've got to be clever with the technology we use to make sure that we are still fulfilling the service. Because again, I'm not sure resident please go, we've got a nice electric vehicle, but you have to wait a couple of days. We need to go stick it back on charge and we're back out to see you. So that's a good example of what we're doing to meet that challenge. But like I say, really we need hydrogen technology to come on board to really power that on, because like I say, electric is fantastic, especially if you're in a smaller geographical area, but with the more rural area of our borough, it's not going to get us where we need to be.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive report. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The Growth and Development Scrutiny Group, which was 20th of April, right, a couple of weeks, I've lost track of time, about 2 weeks ago, isn't it? So the scrutiny matrix was quite detailed, and a lot of the report that we were presented with actually answered a lot of the queries within the scrutiny matrix, and it was in the context as well of the planning department undergoing an awful lot of pressure and stress, not least not having enough staff, where it's understaffed, as there's a shortage of planning officers in the country anyway, but also very unfortunately, Mr. Pegram's long-term illness has obviously affected availability as well. But it was great to see Mr. Pegram actually attending the meeting and well on his way to recovery. So that was good news. But we did hear a lot about there have been a lot of changes of staff, so that itself creates somewhat of a problem. You made comments towards the end of your introduction about, I think you used the term witnesses. So using Chairman's discretion, I thought that it would be valuable to the scrutiny process to invite the instigator of the scrutiny matrix, which just happened to be yourself, but I thought that would be valuable because there were a lot of questions on the matrix, but also I invited both the cabinet member responsible for planning and also the planning committee chairman, because again, I believe that they would have some valuable insight into the scrutiny process. Unfortunately, the cabinet member was unavailable, couldn't attend, but the chairman of the planning committee did attend and also contributed to that. So in my view, I think that's what scrutiny is about. It's about getting the right questions asked and getting witnesses there. And I think it's entirely appropriate to have, for instance, people like the cabinet portfolio. And I think it's also appropriate to have the instigator of the matrix there, because we can then understand, or if there's any misunderstandings, we can understand what the original inquiry was about, if you like. And of course, planning communications is quite complex, as we discovered. There are a lot of aspects to it. As I say, a lot of the queries were answered by virtue of the authorship of the report, but there were things like the publicity and the going beyond the statutory requirements for publicising the planning applications, which I think everybody agreed that we did go beyond that. Doesn't mean that there's always room for complaints from the public. Will always complain that they haven't been notified, and that's one of the areas that we tried to look at to see how neighbours could be notified and what criteria were used by planning officers in order to notify affected people. And of course, that depends on the nature of the application. There was a discussion about the delegation process. For instance, when both the officers and the ward members are in agreement on their views, then that is delegated. And then we talked about the weight given to material planning considerations. Also, again, part of communications, what's also important is if an application is withdrawn, that everybody is notified that an application has been withdrawn, and we were told that that has been addressed and that better notification will take place regarding that. There was a discussion about the requirement for notification of non-material amendments. There was also queries about corporate memory, which is always an interesting one, and one having been around quite a long time, it's always interesting to ensure that the council retains a corporate memory and has knowledge of things that have happened in the past. And I think that the answer to that was probably more down to just ensuring there's a record of responses for the future. But I think it's also important that corporate memory is retained and passed on by officers as much as possible as well. There was a query as well about officers taking some, recommending decisions, basically in effect implementing policy, and so the discussion mentioned that officers were there to implement the policy rather than determining the policy, and there were instances where the officers seem to have made a decision for themselves rather than implementing the policy, which hopefully is set out. There were, in terms of communication as well, notices that are posted on sites. I think the conclusion there was that rather than it being incumbent upon officers to take those notices down, it ought to be either the applicant or we ask the local members or parish councils to check that out of date notices are taken down. There were comments made about delays in uploading comments on the website. Hopefully those will have been addressed. Again, in notifications of applications, notifying adjoining parish councils and adjoining ward members, back to the notifying neighbours, etc. There's an interesting debate as to how you arrive at what addresses should be notified according to the nature of the applications. Conservation areas were on the report, but as they're going to be the subject of another scrutiny item, so conservation areas were not debated in any great detail. The recommendations were approved, but we also introduced a third recommendation in view of the lots of changes that have taken place in the planning department and the staffing, etc., that we have a mechanism to actually review how that is going and a mechanism to come back at some stage to see how changes and how the staffing has taken place. That's as I recall it. I will just ask my Vice Chairman if I've covered everything or if there's anything else you think we ought to mention.
I think you've given a very good summary as to what was a long meeting.
Can I have that in writing?
You can. Just a couple of things. Just going back to what you mentioned about the notification, the signs, the planning notices that appear on lampposts and so on and so forth. We actually learned something very interesting. It's the legal responsibility of the applicant to remove those. And I must have said, I don't think many of us realise that. So nothing to stop us or anyone else removing it, but it's actually the responsibility of the applicant. The other things that we picked up on the meeting were to do with enforcement and appeal. We were very aware of, again, partly because of staff shortages, ways of working, all the rest of it, that there have been comments, usually from parish councils and neighbours, interested parties, that they didn't necessarily know or get to know when enforcement action had been taken by the authority, and also likewise if there had been any appeals and the outcome of the appeals. But we've established now that those provisions are in place, so that hopefully it's down to the old communication thing again, that as well as planning applications, anything that interested parties need to know about appeals and enforcement is also shared and included. And I think that was pretty much everything.
Thank you. Again, a very comprehensive report, for which I thank you. Now, Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Chairman. Our meeting was actually quite a few weeks ago in February, and the next one is coming up. So we've just managed to get ahead of the next meeting. But I'm trying to recall our meeting. I'm sure our Vice Chair, my Vice Chair, will come in and support me if I've forgotten some of the key items. But we had quite a packed agenda as always. We covered the internal audit progress report, internal audit strategy, the capital and investment strategy, and risk management. As far as the internal audit progress is concerned, we had two items brought to our attention, which is the business continuity and housing benefit, which had very good ratings. For business continuity, it was medium and substantive for design and efficiency, and for housing benefits, substantial on both. So the internal audit is on track. We had assurance that we are, despite some of the delays due to COVID, on track in terms of the work plan. So that was reassuring. There was some interesting discussion around some of the ratings, which I know some of our officers have been discussing with the auditors. And I think for me, the discussion really centered around the material impact of whether a rating is medium or whether it's substantial. I'm not trying to change the protocols for our internal auditors, but I think there is something for them to take away in terms of assessing material impact when agreeing the final ratings, which I know Peter, our finance director, is pursuing. The internal audit strategy, we had a review of the 3-year strategy and the plan, and the discussions around here, scrutiny and assurance, were really very much around the 10 audits that are planned and their relationship to the corporate risks. So I think in terms of the areas that we highlight and that we're looking at in the strategy, we had a very interesting discussion again around which particular corporate risks are really highlighting which areas we might want to sort of put into the strategy and the plan. And again, I think that there was some assurance, quite a strong assurance provided that, of course, the plans are based on those corporate risks, both strategic and operational, in terms of that plan. So I think we were quite happy with that. The capital investment strategy, there's quite a lot to discuss here, and in particular, the CIPFA updates on the Prudential and Treasury Management Codes, which recently have changed. And one in particular, really, to report here is the one around decisions for councils around commercial investments, property investments. So I think we have, and this went to Cabinet, I believe, recently, in terms of our strategy and our decisions around commercial property investments. That has to change, and that will change because of the updates in the CIPFA code requirements. The discussion based on that also centered around our commercial reliance on investment income from the property portfolio and generally. Although our capital funding requirements are based on internal borrowing, in other words, we avoid external borrowing, there was discussion and debate around the investment income and whether that would go down. And I think I raised with Sarah earlier the underspend on the capital and the use of that additional income, and whether that was going to have a material impact on our income in the future or reduction in income. So we did discuss that at the group. And again, we were, I think, comfortable and had assurance around the levels of investment income. We do have a dependency ratio on commercial income, which is intended to be maintained at below 30%. And I think the average at the moment is 22 to 24%. So that was reassuring again to hear that we're not breaching those thresholds. And finally, Chairman, there was also a discussion around our Treasury Management Advisors link. I think there can be a tendency with advisors in terms of the professional advice they provide, in terms of the distinction from when it turns from advice to a decision. And we had a discussion around, where we draw the lines. Now, they're professional advisors, so you have to rely and have confidence and trust in the advice they provide. But ultimately, I think the discussion was really trying to center on our ability to ensure that we make those decisions independently as officers and as the council, rather than being too strongly influenced by the advice. So, and we did also have a deep dive into the risk management process and corporate risk register, which we do regularly at the meetings as well. So, a very interesting meeting, varied agenda as always. But I think we had some good discussions, and I will invite my vice chair to come in if he wishes to do so.
I think Councillor Verley's recollection is excellent. Thinking back to that action-packed meeting of February, I think yes, we really did deep dive over the risk, and just sort of thinking back, it's interesting again to see how the reports have been borne out tonight again. Some of the major risks that had increased there was failure to determine major planning applications. Already identifying those risks there, and then also the loss of income as a result of the refund on planning application fees, but that was under provisions of the government's planning performance guarantee. So again, that workload showing through there. But yes, I think Councillor already covered all there.
Again, that sounds like a very full meeting, very interesting, and as though there was some very robust scrutiny. Very good. Right. Well, that leads us on to. Beg your pardon, Charlotte. You've had such a lot to say, I forgot all about you.
I know that you're probably very fed up of hearing my voice this evening, but I have got a few points that I wanted to raise. Just to scope back to what the chairman was saying about the East Midlands Scrutiny Network, the next meeting, just a date for your diaries, is the 24th of June. It will be at Erewash District Council, and it'll be the first in-person meeting that we've had for quite some time. The topic of discussion is budget setting scrutiny. So I'm kind of leaving it out there. We've got annual council coming up, so I don't know who may be attending with me, but of course the invitation is always open to anybody who would like to come along and keep me company. Just a few other points. So the scrutiny training session, we did in fact have some very, very positive feedback after that session. It was very well attended. I don't know if you have seen a difference in the questioning technique and discussion at your most recent scrutiny meetings. I know Councillor Verdi will have to wait another couple of weeks for his, but it might be worth keeping an eye on that one and seeing if it's made a difference to the quality of scrutiny happening.
Yes, I've noticed it's been much better tonight.
Look at you, there's
as Councillor Cumberlack mentioned earlier on Thursday evening this week, I've scheduled a sort of 45-minute drop-in virtual session, 5:15, for anybody that wants to come along and talk about the process of putting in or putting together a scrutiny matrix, how to do it, what we're looking for, and how they get discussed at this group. So this is not necessarily targeted here, it's targeted at those councillors who are putting them in. I know that we've got some who are a little frustrated that they keep coming at us and it keeps getting turned down. What is it that they're doing wrong? How can they improve the situation? I've never done one before, how would I do it? So that's been advertised in Councillors Connections a couple of times. If you would like to pass on that message to your colleagues, I will be online and ready to answer any questions Thursday evening. I have updated the template, the matrix template for next year. So we'll launch that after that particular training session. All I've done is included, and I might mention it when we get on to the next session so you can see where it'll be. But in terms of the discussions that this group have at our following meetings, there will be just an aid memoir for us to think about. Do we want to have any consultation with the public as part of this scrutiny? And what kind of format might that take? And do we want to engage any expert witnesses, portfolio holder, and et cetera, that may well come along and inform our debate going forward? Which leads me nicely onto my last point, which is, as Councillor Cumberlack has already alluded to, we're in the process of pulling together, I don't really like the word witness statement or witness charter, so I'm coming up with something that is more appropriate for Brushcliff. But I've got a couple of examples at the moment, which I'm looking at, and it really does set out for anybody that's coming along to scrutiny who's not familiar with the process, who'll be there, how the room will be laid out, what technology there might be, if they're expected to give a presentation, and how long might we expect it to last, what might we want it to cover. I mean, there was a lot in carbon management, but I expect you was thinking towards the end of an hour, I thought, come on, I've just got to get on with it, because there's also a lot of discussion to be had. It will also make clear the provisions in the Constitution with regard to how witnesses can address the meeting and the limitations that are placed on their ongoing involvement for the rest of the meeting. And to my mind, those witnesses include, you know, the councillor submitting the topic for scrutiny, which we've already discussed, a portfolio holder, officers in attendance to present to the group. I do feel for people like Adam this evening, who's come along to scrutiny for the very first time, and bless him, he was nervous. I mean, you're a frightening bunch. And to the rest of us, it's, you know, we know what we're doing now, but it is nerve-wracking if you've never done it before. And of course, to, you know, our community interest groups, community representatives that may well come along in the future as well. So the witness charter under another name will set all of that out. Just finally, I want to say thank you very much to all of you. This is your last scrutiny meeting, your last COG meeting under this format before we get to annual council. And of course, we will be losing Councillor Cumberlack to pastures and roles new. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for bearing with me over the last 2 years since we revised the format for scrutiny and the way we were doing things. And I personally feel that we've made a good team and that we have made a lot of progress together. So thank you.
Yes, if I can endorse that, I've, if I can use the word, enjoyed my term. And yes, I think we've made a very good team, and I do think we've made some differences which have been worthwhile. I think the new format definitely has very much more positive results, and we have put in place actions which have been beneficial to Brushcliff. Having said all that, I think I now am right. We move on to item 9, which is the consideration of the scrutiny matrices. Can we not think of another word for this as well as witnesses? You have to put your teeth in when you say it. The first one we have is biodiversity request, net gain. It almost rather implies it's asking a question about something which is due to be implemented in the future, which we haven't yet got a handle on. But I think the answer has, by the recommendation, has been provided to Councillor Thomas. Is that right?
That is correct, yes. Officers have gone back to Councillor Thomas directly and responded to her question. She's actually sent me an email saying that was much appreciated and that she was happy with the response that had come back.
So in that event, that one. Oh, Councillor Wheeler.
Thanks, Sharon. It's come to the whole point of what Charlotte said earlier. I think we need to perhaps communicate more about the training on Thursday, because again, those council connections, you'll be disgusted to learn this, Charlotte, but I don't think all our colleagues read it in a lot of detail. And I might be doing something a bit disservice. So I think that this is such an important topic. Alexander and Leon needs to go out, because this is not the first time, and this is not against any particular council. This is happening across all different groups and all different councils. It's not political, but the amount of comments on it is saying, why don't you just come and ask the officer the question? Because scrutiny is not about asking a question in terms of, in effect, probing, saying, I want to ask an officer why we do this. It's about, once you've got that answer, if you're not happy with it, then we scrutinise the policy. And I think this is what some councillors either know and pretend they don't know, or generally don't know. And until we can make sure we cover that in training and absolutely put that communication out, because it's, if I'm frustrated, I can imagine the officers who can't show their frustration. I actually really like some of these responses, which are very direct, by saying, come and ask the question. You won't get a lot of council, so actually that's how it should be. I would have used some stronger words. So I think just a general point to push that on there, I think we really, really need to, because as I say, it is quite frustrating to see that. But at the same time, we've got to get the balance. We don't want to stop people putting in the item. That's why the training is important. They know to put it in the right way, in the right manner, as you've seen with a future one down here from, as we'll get to in a minute, where there's a couple of good ones on there, which we will be taking forward and including the items. So sorry for that little rant, but it was so frustrating when I actually first read this when it first came out. It's a good job I had a week to calm down.
I thoroughly agree with you, and I have to say I have had councillors, as you say, from all parties, saying, well, I don't know who to ask. I don't know how we get round that one. I think that's communication that we need to put out somehow. But yes, I don't know who to ask, or and I don't like to bother them.
Well, you'll bother them more by taking them to the meeting.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. But that is, we need to be communicating that, getting that across. And maybe that is something for this drop-in session to say to them, ask the officers. And if you could supply us with a list of the officers who deal with what, that would be really useful. And if we can have extension numbers on it, because I've got a list on which I keep scribbling on when I find somebody, oh, I've got another one, and I write it on so that I don't have to ring Democratic Services and say, I want to speak to so-and-so, but I don't know how to get hold of them.
That's not changing, Chair. It used to be that we go to the service director, to the director first to ask a question, they would put that down. So is that this change? I mean, I always do that first. So if I'm by now I know where everyone should go to that point of contact. But I'm just thinking whether do we need to check that.
We used to go, changed. Corporate memory here. We used to go to Viv and ask Viv.
Yeah, well, I don't appreciate. Yeah, I think after 3 years, I do see Morrison's often. I think if I said that to her, I'd get 2 words back, which I don't blame her. But what I'm saying is, if it was something under like Dave Banks' portfolio, he thought it would always go Dave first. It would then say, so I'll pass it on to there. So I don't know if that's still the case or not. Which Charlotte.
I think that for a start off, yes, that's correct. So it's either the director or the service manager. So we try and keep that initial contact at the top level, because if it's not the right person, we generally know who to go to. I would also say that I put myself in that position and people come to me with all sorts of random questions because they don't know who is the best person to get to, and I can help them sort that out and then pass them on. I think the difficulty is one, this information was given out 3 years ago, straight after the election for in the induction and where we go to. And of course, we've since had a management restructure, which has perhaps changed some of those responsibilities around. Mr. Banks, for example, is now responsible for communities where he wasn't previously, and therefore you might not know where you're supposed to go to get those answered questions. So we'll make sure that we take that on board, and perhaps we'll put something out in Councillors Connection, which we appreciate not everybody reads, but if we have really important stuff, for example, the scrutiny training has also gone directly to emails for councillors as well. So we do try and take that on board.
Anybody want to add anything to that? No? Yeah.
Only to agree. I mean, Councillor Wheeler beat me to it. I think it's a classic. It's a classic example of people not quite understanding how scrutiny works, and I think between us, if we can get the message across, then that's got to be welcome. So I fully agree.
Right, we move now to the next scrutiny matrix, which is the one on online print communication put out by the borough. I have to say, and I think that possibly is reflected in the recommendation here, that this is talking to a large extent about political views, and that really is not for this meeting. We are apolitical, and if there are any communications issues which are political, that should be for I would have thought, I don't know, leaders meeting. I'm not privy to those, so I'm assuming that's where that should go. However, in terms of communication, I talk a lot about communication, and I do think that this is possibly an area which could be scrutinised, because we move on with the way we communicate. Technology moves on. We need to look at how we are communicating. And we've talked about diversity and inclusion. We need to look at the whole picture of how the borough communicates. So that maybe is something that we need to expand upon and move on further down the line. But I leave that open for you, and I can see Jonathan has been waving at me.
It should obviously, if it's 2 points. First of all, I think it may be that say council isn't aware about how it works with the communication out there. It's not just this council. If you look at communication from every district council, from the county council even, there are set rules on who quotes come from. So it isn't the ward council. So if it's something in my division at the county council, it's transport and highways, it'll come from chairman of transport and highways, Councillor Clark there, for example, won't mention me. And that's nothing to do with what political party. Same with, I looked at other district councils and the different political controls, it's the same. There's perhaps just that communication that that's how it works. That's the, I don't even know if it's official legislation. I think it is. I can't remember what the exact legislation is, but it's what happens every council. So perhaps so that's that reassurance that we don't do it that way. But I mean, it does link in nicely because, like I say, this item that will come forward to communities in October, I was already going to be bringing something similar back. I was waiting to put an item in after I got feedback from Ed about some points raised on the customer survey feedback we had a couple of meetings ago. So the fact that this is brought forward, it makes sense to get part of that wider external communications, because we did raise quite a few issues around the survey and what people think of me. I think it was quoted earlier, only 26% of people feel engaged by the council. So it's important we have a strategy to look at how we're engaging with the 74% of people who don't think they're engaged with, because that's such a high figure. So I think the points raised, which aren't the political points, but then also the points around that political bit, perhaps we just go back to Councillor Walker, isn't it? I think, yeah, just explain how that works, perhaps just so fully aware, and perhaps even to other councillors aware as part of training and future scrutiny, just to, well, a future training session, just to know that that's why we do things as we do with the communication at the moment. But again, we can also cover that in detail in the October item as well.
Wheeler. Anybody else anything to add? Councillor Clark?
Jonathan. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, these are largely political questions which are on this particular matrix, and I don't think they're appropriate to be scrutinised. What I think is more appropriate, I think, which is what you alluded to, Chairman, is for us to scrutinise the methods of communication that the council employs in communicating with the public and business, or our service users, or whatever description you want to give them, and ensuring that we are keeping up to date with all modern methods of communication, and that we are reaching everybody, because obviously there are still people who are not familiar with electronic communication, and will still need some hard copy. But at the other end of the spectrum, there are now obviously very sophisticated methods of electronic communication, and it's just a question of challenging or investigating that we are keeping up with all those modern methods.
I think that all points raised here would be addressed by the officer recommendation. So I think whether you take this as a political matrix, or looking at the other points that have been made, the officer recommendation of looking at this as a wider part of a discussion, and bringing that discussion to a scrutiny group as we look at a new external communication strategy. I think it'd be really good to get that understanding out there and do that via scrutiny.
So that sounds to me as though we're all in agreement that we widen the scope of this and that it goes to community scrutiny group in October. Yep, everyone's in agreement with that. The next one is electric car charging points in the borough. Councillor Wheeler has already talked about electric car charging points given the carbon management.
Every single one of the points raised by Councillor Walker, I covered in the meeting. I asked all the questions to officers, and the responses were got back. I think Councillor Bounce took down notes, who doesn't get the bad books and put, and some committee doesn't want to be, but if not, it'll be available on the recording. Councillor Walker's got any questions, she'll come to me or to directly.
So in that event, won't be going forward for scrutiny, but the questions have been answered. Oh, yes, exactly. It was there in hindsight.
Yeah,
right.
I was just to add to that, questions either to the chairman of scrutiny, or indeed question to the cabinet portfolio, who should obviously be au fait with the policies of the council.
We were going to raise it with the cabinet member, couldn't be there for personal reasons on the night. That's why picked up by the officer. But I think the answer came back to me, answered all the points. I'm sure Councillor Walker disagrees, to be able to have that conversation with said officer.
Right, and has everybody looked at their future work programmes? The only one with any alterations on is communities. Waste strategy at the moment is still in the sausage machine, as Councillor Clark would put it. You've now got the external communications in October. So we're all in agreement with those. So I think that, Councillor Gray, sorry.
Councillor Valley, are we having a session just where we have a chat? Because I think our work programme starts on the 30th of June, but my diary says we've got a meeting in 2 weeks' time.
I believe there is a diary date in the diary for that meeting, and I mean, having a look at that agenda, it is very, very intensive, and I have raised this a number of times with Peter and Sarah. So yes, we will be doing that, Councillor Gray. Yes.
There's actually a date in your diary for the 19th of May, which was the original date for the next governance scrutiny group, but because some of the external reports from the statement of accounts and various things like that won't be ready. Excuse me. You can tell I've talked too much. Indeed. So the meeting's been moved.
So I'll have to have a Thursday off, is what you're saying.
You may have Thursday off, yes.
Or we can have another. Another point, Chair, I mean, is there nothing on there that could ever be moved either to here or another group? Just think, I know there's a lot of it has to be governance. Well, I think growth development would love to have some more items on there. I just think, you know, like I said, as Councillor Brodie said, if there's a lot of items and the meeting's gone for a long time, you worry you're not having enough time to scrutinise all those said items. But like what we had on communities last year, which has kind of gone the other way now, but it seems to have passed on to going round the circle, so to speak.
I mean, I think some of the items obviously cyclically appear, you know, and have to be dealt with at a particular point, but there may be scope to look at some of them. I don't know. We'll have to sort of pursue this. I think we've raised it previously, and it needs probably another visit. Particularly looking at, I mean, if you look at the September agenda, you know, there's 4 items on there. So yeah, we need to sort of break it up a little bit more, I think, or possibly other groups.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of my last meeting. And if I can say thank you very much to all of you for making it a pleasurable term. And I look forward to seeing you in another guise.
Thank you, and well done sharing of these groups.
Well, that's very sycophantic, isn't it? He's hoping to get some dinner, I think.